So, important note regarding Connect before I start today. There was a mistake. The preset settings for Connect is that every question is 10 points apiece. Yeah, that would be an insane number of points. So unfortunately for some of them, I thought I had changed it, and I didn't. So you'll notice that, like, for adaptive, there are 30 questions. They're supposed to be 1 point apiece, but it's saying the whole assignment is 300 points. So as you can imagine, we're going to divide by 10. I'm going to divide by 10 when I do your scores, right? So your max will be 30 points, right? So whatever points you have right now, right, it's not in the hundreds, okay? But, you know, if it's close to 300, then, you know, you'll get your 30 points, right? It'll be adjusted accordingly. There was one other assignment where somebody had some difficulty with it, and so I think it's not grading it correctly. You know, I look at and I download everybody's grades, and if no one in the class got a perfect score, then there's probably something wrong with that assignment, and I usually bump you guys up, right, and make adjustments accordingly. But do let me know if there's problems so that I can get them fixed. So there's one other assignment, I think it's wound, I was checking. Yeah, that's another one where it's only 15 points, but it's saying 150. So the other reason why I wanted to go to Connect this morning was to let you guys know and remind you, because I mentioned them last time, that there are 3 assignments down here: epidemiology, urogenital, and antimicrobial medications. These are assignments that you need to do and complete. I have them as May 2nd, so you could technically do them even after test 4. I suggest that you do them as soon as possible, and I even suggested last time that maybe try and do antimicrobial medications for today. You know, and then knock out another one next week, and the next one I suggest would be epidemiology, right, and urogenital. These are ones that you're not going to be tested on, right? This is not stuff I'm going to directly lecture on, but it is information that you need to go over, and I need to have evidence that it's been covered in some way, and so I do that via these Connect assignments. Any questions regarding that? Okay, so make sure that you work on those and get those done. So the other thing that I added last night, I'm trying to click on the right spot, is an assignment in Canvas for those of you guys that volunteered for the Science Expo, and again, thank you. Put in your time, but I'll also check with sign-in sheets, and make sure you fill out the short survey link that I have in there as well. Get that done by Monday if you want your points, okay? So there's a link to it right here in assignments. It's under modules, right, for the bonus. There's one other talk that was supposed to happen and has been rescheduled for a Friday, and I got the email about that. I don't think she updated the flyer, though, but I'll post that for you guys today. I'm going to look it up. I got it in the midst of all the craziness last week, so I hadn't had a chance to investigate it further. The one about the neuromuscular stuff, I know some of you guys that are interested in health field, probably be one you want to go to. Let's see. Okay, I think that's it for announcements. I can't think of anything else right now, so we'll move on. So we need to finish up wound infections first before going on to skin infections next. So for gas gangrene, also known as Clostridial myonecrosis, this gives you a lot of information in these 2 names, right? The common name and sometimes the more proper name. With infections, of course, it's always good to know what causes it, right? What the causative agent is. For this type of infection, it's most commonly a bacteria, right? Because we're going to ask the question next, gram-positive or gram-negative. That's a clue. And there's a clue, of course, in the name, Clostridial, right? There are several species of Clostridium. That genus The most common offender is Clostridium perfringens. So several species can cause this type of infection, right? But the most common one that we deal with is Clostridium perfringens. Is this one gram-positive or gram-negative? Anyone know? Nobody filled in their stuff, huh? This one's gram-positive. Can it grow under anaerobic conditions? And the answer is yes. It actually requires anaerobic conditions to grow. You guys remember another Clostridium that we talked about last time that requires anaerobic conditions to grow? Tetanus. Tetanus. So again, you know, the types of wounds that favor these types of environments that we have to worry about. What's our number one type of wound? So do we worry about a laceration or an incision or puncture or burn? What one of those ones that we talked about, the different types of wounds, do we worry about anaerobic environments forming most often? Puncture, burns are another one as well. Right? Any wound that have a lot of dead tissue, too, right? So burns usually have a lot of dead tissue. Have foreign material in them. Right? Puncture wounds, burns are right up there with, you know, most commonly having an anaerobic situation where these types of organisms could grow. The problem with this one, as it is with a lot of bacteria that are pathogenic, it doesn't just eat us, it produces toxins that help it eat us, right? So what types of toxins, what type of damage do these toxins do? Now, for tetanus, it's a very specific, right, toxin and a very specific action. For these guys, it's general cell death. But again, this is not good for us, right? Our cells dying at the hands of a bacteria, namely its toxins. Oh, my animation didn't work. So, one of the reasons why it's called gas gangrene, and one of the definitive symptoms of this infection, is that when these organisms are growing anaerobically, typically they're doing fermentation. And so fermentation sometimes can produce gases. And so that's why it's called gas gangrene, because these organisms will, under these anaerobic conditions, these fermentation conditions, they'll actually produce gas. And so you get this frothy discharge, right? This bubbly discharge from the wounded area. So that's the significance of the word gas, right? It's the fact that these organisms are actually producing gas. Clostridium perfringens can be found in feces, so can be found in the intestinal tract of humans and several animals. So that's how it's perpetuated in the environment. How it causes such debilitating infection or disease is the toxin production, as well as the gas, because the gas actually, as it's in the tissue, it's going to want to leave that area, right? Gas is spread out. And so what happens is that as that gas is produced, it puts pressure, right? And so if you don't have if you have a tight area where the skin isn't been breached yet, it'll actually swell up quite significantly and then burst. But that pushing of the gas against the tissue and the fluids in the area actually helps the organism spread. So how do we prevent this from happening? As always with wounds, proper care, right? Prompt, proper care. Don't wait. And especially when we're talking about dead tissue, it always needs to be removed, right? Dead means it's gone, it's not going to recover, and it's just a food supply for pathogenic organisms. Treatments, again, if we've got dead tissue, we need to remove it. Hyperbaric oxygen has been used a lot for wound care, more and more so nowadays. This is oxygen under pressure, right? So it's helping diffuse the oxygen in the area, which is going to help the living cells, right, because they need oxygen. But this is an anaerobe, right? So if we throw oxygen in there, what's going to happen to that bacteria? Can it survive oxygen? No, it's an anaerobe, right? And so that diffusion of oxygen into that area is going to kill it. The reason why it's able to survive in the wound is because, again, usually it's living in an area where there's dead tissue, right? Blood vessels have been damaged. We can't get the oxygen into the area. The good news is this is a good old gram-positive bacteria, right? So can we give penicillin? Yeah, right? We can give penicillin-like drugs, right? Or other drugs if someone is allergic to penicillin. The most common alternative is erythromycin. So the last one for our skin infections is cat scratch disease. So what's a zoonotic disease? This one's listed as zoonotic. So what do we think of when we say the word zoo? Animals other than humans, right? So can we get infections from animals? Yeah. And some infections animals have don't really make them sick, right? They harbor different microbes that wouldn't make them outwardly look sick to us. And that's an unfortunate thing, too, because then our interactions with them could expose us to these organisms, and we don't have a symbiotic relationship between those organisms that they have a symbiotic relationship with, and they cause infection for us. So by definition, it's a disease common in animals, but can be transmitted to humans. So the most common one that we're aware of, right, although, you know, in the late stages animals will act strange, is rabies, right? That's a virus infection that's common among animals, especially wild animals, that can be transmitted to humans, and for humans, for the most part, can be fatal. So I'm going to skip to my last page where I go over all the answers. So remember I said I don't necessarily want us memorizing antibiotics, but as we go through these, I'm going to mention different antibiotics and give you guys a general knowledge of them. So Ampicillin is a modified penicillin. So this is plain old penicillin, right? And commonly this section over here is modified. So in this case right here is the modification. And that modification to this particular penicillin to form what we call ampicillin makes it what we call a broad-spectrum antibiotic, because penicillins, as we know, work really well against gram-positives. They can enter in the cell and interfere with the ability to synthesize peptidoglycan. The problem with gram-negatives is that they have an additional membrane, right? What do we call that membrane? The outer membrane. And that outer membrane usually stops most antibiotics actually from even getting into the cell. And so therefore it can't interfere with the metabolic processes that that antibiotic interferes with. These modifications that they've made to penicillin to make all the different penicillins you have out there, some of them, because of that modification, now gram-negative cells will actually take up this antibiotic. And it will interfere with their peptidoglycan synthesis and leave them more susceptible to lysis by osmotic pressure. So this one can be given, but unfortunately they can be inactivated by beta-galactomases. So amoxicillin is another penicillin derivative that's broad-spectrum. Penicillinases are enzymes that some bacteria have that break this ring structure right here in penicillin and deactivate it. So even the modified penicillins have this, what we call beta-lactam ring, and are susceptible to that type of antibiotic. So sometimes, for some infections, they'll give augmentin. Augmentin is a combination of amoxicillin and a drug that deactivates this enzyme, the beta-lactamase, so that the antibiotics are not destroyed if they have that enzyme. So, it's a constant war, right? What do you have? What do I have? How can I defeat you? So if I mentioned a penicillin, but in this case it's a broad spectrum antibiotic, so is this one going to be gram-positive or gram-negative? It's actually gram-negative, right? Because we couldn't give just straight up penicillin. That's why we got to give something like ampicillin or amoxicillin. The causative agent of this disease, so what bacteria causes this infection? That's Bordetella henselae. And it's zoonotic, right? Which means mainly we find it in animals, right? But it can be passed to humans and cause infectious disease in humans. So that's why it's zoonotic, right? It's transmitted mainly by cats, an animal, hence the name cat scratch disease. What's the definitive symptoms of this infection? So what would alert a doctor that maybe their patient might have this type of infection and prompt him to ask other questions? Anyone know? So I'm going to rewind to a picture I have here. So it's hard to see in this picture, but here's the initial wound, right? And remember that when we have inflammation, when we have invasion, that fluid that's drained from that area, say from a wound site, goes through the lymphatic system, right? And as it travels through that system, that fluid we call lymph is filtered by what? By lymph nodes. So if you look closely in this picture, do you see this bump right here in his armpit region? That's a swollen lymph node, right? A lot of times you get swollen lymph nodes associated in the area of the wound, right? So that's a pretty good indicator, right? And then, of course, you would ask the patient, have you had contact with cats, right? Do you have any wounds, right? And then, it would lead to this potential diagnosis of cat scratch. Of course, one of the main reasons why it's called cat scratch is because, cats are notorious for scratching you, right? And that creates a wound, and that would be an entry point for this bacteria to enter in. But you could already have a wound, right, and be messing with a cat and playing with it and get infected with this bacteria, get your wound infected with this bacteria from the cat. It also can be from the bite. The saliva of the cat, right, contains the bacteria. And as you know, they lick their whole bodies, right? They clean themselves that way. So they don't necessarily have to lick you or anything. You can just very close direct contact, you could pick up this bacteria from them. Right? So how is it transmitted though to cats? Right? How are cats infected? Right? Fleas, right? So transmission via fleas. So how could you avoid getting this infection? Get a dog. I love that. Yeah, get a dog. Actually, I think dogs can carry this bacteria too. It's just not as common. It's more common in cats. It's more common for people to get it transmitted to them via cats. Because the problem with cats is especially like the feral cats that live next door to me right now, they are not used to humans and not used to be handled, right? And so my son all the time, he's like, "Ooh, kitty!" I'm like, "Get in the car, let's go, leave them alone." Those are not pet cats, right? You don't pet them, you don't interact with them, right? They probably have fleas, right? Not a good idea. They could transmit infection to us. And those type of cats too, again, they're not used to human contact, and so they will scratch and bite you if you try to force yourself on them. And so that's how most commonly you'd be infected. Also, if you have your own pet cat and you don't have flea preventative on it, or you let it go outside and get exposed to other cats, then it's going to potentially pick up that infection. So really just avoiding stray cats, especially ones with fleas. And those are the ones, you know, that are more likely to infect you. Most adults know this, right? You see a stray cat, you walk away, right? You're like, it's all good. Kids, not so much, right? So this is more common in children. For the most part, as always with wounds, clean them and treat with antibiotics if there is the evidence of infection. And especially for this one, they're going to give something like Ampicillin because it's a gram-negative bacteria, and that penicillin derivative will work against gram-negatives. So that's it for wounds.